Robert, how are you today?
Living the dream. How are you?
As well, my friend, as well. Really excited to talk to you. I think we're going to have a lot of fun going through our discussion here today.
I agree. I'm looking forward to having a productive conversation and laughing and crying and everything in between.
You know, I do try to get most of my guests to cry because it is such a, meaningful. No, I'm just kidding. We have no tears yet shed on this podcast, but today could be our first.
Yeah.
So, Robert, let's start at the beginning of your professional journey. Where'd you go to school? What'd you study? And what'd you start doing when you were done with that?
Went to school at San Jose State University and California State University Stanislaus. I was always just what they call a whiz with computers. It was one of those activities where it made me really come alive. And at the moment, I have a son who's 5 years old. He looks just like me, and he's very mechanically minded. I couldn't hammer a picture into a wall to save my life. So we all have our strengths, and we all have what they call the Ikigai, right? Where there's like the overlap of what you enjoy, what you're good at, and what people want and what people need. And just programming was so just lit my brain on fire. But I sucked at anything physical, mechanical. You had to build it with your hands in real life, like couldn't work. But if you had to put memory in registers or figure out pointer arithmetic or build classes, objects, structures, hey, that was my jam. Even to the point where I was in high school and we had this thing called the Space and Engineering program, and it was just so cool. And it was like everything was more just like science geared, right? In English class, we read Jurassic Park and Fahrenheit 451. And then we had this engineering class where we made a marble sorter. Like, I guess Lego, the company, has these special kits where you have the Lego bricks, but you also have motors and sensors, and you could program in their special programming language where if like a blue marble passes in front of a sensor, it renders number 52. And if a red passes through, it renders like 91. And then you can have logic of if the color is between this and this range, then you run the motor -5 for 5 seconds and move a marble down in that path. And if it's this other one, it moves it that and in that path. And I was like, it's so simple, but it's so fun and so cool. And they put us in groups of 4, and the other 3 people would like build the blocks, but they couldn't even program a line of code to save their life. But I was the yin to their yang. I couldn't build, but I could build abstractly. And that led to wanting to be a computer programmer, but I did some research, and it's either like a dead end, you're a code monkey or freelancer, or you get into upper management, and congratulations, you don't get to do the thing that you love to do in the first place. You manage other people. And the third path for me was entrepreneurship. And that led to creating software, creating courses, doing webinars, doing podcasting. And that has led me now to, I have a podcast agency called DFY Podcast, where if someone has content, they have a podcast, we make the reels, the images, the graphics, the social posting. And that still lets me scratch the itch in all these different ways, right? Because there's the organization and the management. And then now there's all these AI tools that are built into like repurposing content. Now there's LinkedIn, and people are more accessible with social media. And then sandwiched somewhere in there is having to better myself and figuring out social skills, which doesn't come easily or fast to us computer geeks. And that's all the different ways where I'm improving myself. So started as a computer programmer. I still write code, still make software, but the focus now is on podcasting for others, including meetings such as like we're doing right this instant.
Awesome. All right. You've given us a lot to dissect, so we're going to go back and cut it apart and piece it all back together a little bit here. So first of all, I love the analogy of how you started playing with it's Mindstorms, right? The Lego Mindstorms.
It's been so many years.
I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. When I was in high school, just to date myself a little bit, the sort of our geeky group went off to a place called the CDC, which stood for the Career Development Center of all things. It was basically, here's all the kids that like the system's not working for, but they're going to go off and do interesting things, we think. And we had similar, like lots of cool, fun toys to play with and etc. When I was doing that, I really couldn't think ahead as to like careering, right? It was sort of I can just go do these things. I can go build stuff. So when you came out of school, two quick questions back to back is, did you actually get like a CS degree? And once you left, when you hit the ground, where did you want to run to at that moment? So forgetting today, but let's just stay back there for a moment.
I got a bachelor's in computer science, 4-year degree, and I transitioned into working on staff at the same college I graduated from. So I'm like a little bit east of the Bay Area, about like, say,
Sure.
like 2-3 hour drive from San Francisco. And a lot of my peers went off to like Google and Microsoft or something else, and they had to like work these like super long hours. And I didn't want to do that, right? I tried living in a big cramped big city. I lived in San Jose for 2 years, and it was just like there's not even a place to park your car. I was like, it's not for me. And even since high school, I was doing a little bit on the side. I was doing some of the entrepreneurship, even like junior, senior year of high school. So that was really what I wanted to do. And I fell into the lie that they tell a lot of us that, well, you have to have college, you have to have a resume, you have to have a career. And maybe that was true a couple of decades ago, but it's way less true now. And I guess it is good to have that piece of paper, right? To have the proof. And if you can manage to do both, then that is what you should do. So I still made it work, still got the piece of paper, but because I had my own business that I was kind of slowly growing when I found the time to fall back on, I didn't feel just like forced to go into Silicon Valley where you have a bigger paycheck, but also
Sure.
bigger cost of living, and who knows how many years you had to sacrifice. And then I worked on staff at CSU Stanislaus for 2 years, and I was just kind of seeing where the two paths would go. And I think that I really embraced learning, which like guys like us, like we have to do, right? That's what separates the people that kind of drift through life versus those that really do, is like learning. And so I geeked out on like Joel on software. Remember that guy?
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah.
and then there was this documentary that like I bought like a DVD from him once. There was a documentary where he hired some college interns, and the first day they said that interns like, here's this book, read this whole book on such and such programming language and make a piece of software. And they made like a remote desktop software. And so when I was working at CSU Stanislaus, it's because it's like a state college government.
Right.
They're fine with you going slow. It's very relaxed. And they're also fine with starting a project 3 months later, stopping it, because there's no pressure to make money, which is fine, right? It's just not very hectic. And so they would say, hey, here's this book, learn Java beans, right? Learn SharePoint. And I would remember the Joel documentary and say, okay, so I'll learn it in 1 day. And on day 2, like start cranking up the code. But I got really frustrated because I would do my work too fast. And then classic job where if you work too fast, they give you more stuff to do too fast. And then all your other coworkers are working way too slow. And they stuck me like way in the back of some science building. And I stuck it out as long as I could for 2 years and saved up the money. But then I said, I had a really good month in my business where I made more in 1 month of my business than in 1 year at the supposedly safe 9 to 5.
Wow.
And then I kind of kept on doing like the Ben Franklin of like listing the pros and the cons. And I said, well, the pros, I interact with people. I guess the pros, there's like health insurance, but I was struggling to come up with pros. And then I said, well, hey, how do I build the same in my own business? Well, pay for my own out-of-pocket health insurance and go to networking events. And at a certain point, it just tipped the scales in that favor. And I knew like on the emotional side, I wanted to keep doing it, but I just logically held myself back until I just finally convinced myself logically, like, hey, it doesn't make sense anymore to stay. And that was like right before the 2009 recession, and they were doing like furlough days. So they're like, well,
Sure.
you don't work on Friday and we'll cut your pay by 20%. So you're stuck in this middle thing. And I was like, it's time to get out. And SharePoint was so frustrating. I was like, I don't like the path I'm on. So it's time to be in control again.
All right. So it sounds like we actually had some similarities in the earliest stages of our journey, if a good decade plus apart. I'm curious, is there something that you would point to even earlier in life that kicked you into that entrepreneurial mindset? Like, I remember graduating college and not wanting to apply at the time. This was Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, right? Or, maybe Apple, et cetera, but it was mid 90s. And I just wasn't excited about that. I could never explain why. And, my parents are like, well, we know why. I'm curious, was it obvious you were bit by this entrepreneurial bug from the very get-go?
Probably from 2000 until 2020, there was this gap of we didn't have as much fun as we should have with computers. And after 2020, now that we have AI and ChatGPT, the fun is back, right? The tinkering is back. But when we were still figuring out the internet, RSS feed, social media, I feel like there was just 20 years of not really having as much fun as we could have been having.
I want to debate with you on that one for a moment, if you may, because I will tell you that I will point to sort of three distinct phases of the internet as what I would think of the most fun times. I agree with you. One's right now, right? Just whether it's vibe coding or just generating stuff. It's fun. It's like we have toys. Yeah. The other one was back at the very beginning, 96 to 99, 2000 almost, where you could be building any kind of website for any kind of purpose. Could be, there were so many abstract things from people's personal homepages all the way to corporate entities. And then I'm going to say, actually, specifically countering you, is on that mid 2000s. What I loved about that time is you're right. You couldn't quite build what you can do today, but it was also the internet itself was more fun. It was before the internet turned what I would call overly corporate, overly commercial, and a little on the dark and heavy kind of side. So that's my counterpoint, and again, different ages, so different experiences.
Fair enough. I mean, you say mid 2000s, you could still play with your MySpace page and put the HTML customizations. I guess you could still do a lot of that, but the real good time, I think, was pre, right, where you had an answering machine, you had dial-up, you had a computer room. There were all these floppy disks of shareware, and my dad was a collector. So just like how the current implementation of that today is, the people that every couple of days they're on some new AI tool and they never really get anywhere with it. But for some of us, we're like, ooh, they save us time, because like you can use that AI to make music, make that AI to make images. And so my dad, his hobby was just like finding the shareware, downloading it off the BBSs and putting it on. And there was just unlimited, just floppy disks I could sift through as a kid. And when I was 3 years old, I came across Print Shop Pro, right? Where you could create banners and brochures and things like that. And that was in the day of dot matrix printers, where if you wanted to make you were limited to like 8.5 by 11, but they were all stringed together, and you would inch off the little sides, and it took like 20 minutes to make something, and it made that terrible screeching sound. But I was 3 years old, and I was just experimenting with the user interface, and I didn't know I was 3, I didn't know what like brochure or banner meant. And I was like, okay, I'll just play around with the printer and hit something. And then I went and, hung out with my dad to watch like Shining Time Station or Romper Room or who knows the heck what. And then
Romper Room.
But the printer in the other room, it just kept going and kept going. And then when we checked on it like an hour later, I was kind of in trouble because it printed like a whole long banner. Like, you'd hang up and say happy birthday, but it blew my mind a little bit, right? How like one, you think of like, okay, a computer, a printer, you put words on a piece of paper, that's something, but hey, we can shift it and make a whole thing. And I think you could even create like different squares, so you can make like a whole sign, and they would be like, put page 2 here and page 3 here. And it just like blew my mind how you could create something that you wouldn't normally think you could make with a computer, right? You think, oh, I'm limited to the size. No, they thought of all these other ways to do it. And it's problem solving, right? You think, well, back in those days, I had to have like a marker and a piece of paper. Well, no. There's this tool now where you can kind of, and it was black and white, and it would like print all the little, I think it could do solid black, but it would use up all the ink. And so it was just fun to play around with user interfaces, the output, and see what you could create with it.
Nice. I mean, I haven't heard the word shareware in so long, and I'm a little if you're one of the people watching this tonight, you're like, Jeremy seems a little like sort of not starstruck, but just sort of tongue tied. I haven't thought about some of these areas of technology in so long, which is funny because I was actually just talking 2 weeks ago with another buddy of, we were wondering if Cursor could vibe code all of Turbo Pascal, including the compiler and the language these days.
Find
So
out.
let's continue with your journey a little bit here. So you were going off on your own. You were already making money doing so. Did you have any concern about safety net? Was it something you're just like, let's just see what happens, and I'm not even going to think of the consequences? What were the actual risks you felt you were facing at the time?
I was concerned about safety net. I've worked since I was 17. I'm jealous of these guys that can like sell a company and then take 5 years off. And I looked into some of like the money mindset sort of stuff, and they said, like, have a cushion, right? Save a month of expenses, save 6 months of expenses. But that's why, and I think it forced me to create something useful, because that's a real problem. Like we mentioned a few minutes ago, of like just being the hobbyist, the dabbler. And
Right.
early in college, the arrogance would get to me, right? Like you mentioned it earlier about like the opportunities that you have. Like when college first started, I had an in with a guy at Sun Microsystems, and he was like, "Hey, I can get you like a $17 per hour paid internship." And I just wasn't interested. And looking back, like I wonder what could have come of that, but woulda, shoulda, coulda, and who knows if it distracted from different things. But yeah, I found myself just with the arrogance early on of just something like, it'll work out. I'll be the millionaire someday. And it's like, well, if you don't do the work, if you don't stay up on things. And so I was at one point goofing off with I forget the term. It's not obfuscation, but like encoding data into an image. So someone sees an image, but there's like data hidden in there.
Yeah.
There's some term for it, but I remember like geeking out at that. And I had this mentor early on, and he was like, that's not a way to make money. Like, it's good if you want to be some kind of like scientist researcher, but like, what about serving yourself? And so, and he hooked me up where he wanted me to make what's called a link tracker. And now in the days of, now it was like Google ads and things like that, that's mainstream. But back then he was like, yeah, this thing doesn't really exist yet, or it's not easy, where you say, if I run an ad or have a link from website A to website B, we want to be able to track it. That way we know if this brought 100 clicks or 200 clicks. We want to be able to split test. So if we send half the traffic here, half the traffic there. And he was like, this is something where you can make it and it'll still scratch the itch of saying, here's what I want to do. In the middle part where you stress out and you debug and then you get something that works and you iterate, you'll still scratch that itch, but people can use it. They can use it to make money. They will pay you for money. That will pay your bills. Money is important. And then you can get somewhere in life. So I was like, hey, as sad as it is to be capitalist focused, we need to create something that will make money for others and they can pay money to us. So that way we can pay our bills, at least until we cure cancer or come up with some AI tool that solves everything. But until then, got to make money somehow.
It seems like a great lesson, and probably landed at the right time. I think my hunch on entrepreneurs is most of us somewhere around the way learn some version of do the work. And candidly, now in my 50s, anytime, if I look back to any time that I'm like, that didn't work out so great, there was something where I'm like, well, did I do all the work? Right. And I always sort of look at it from that lens. And that's not always the problem, of course. What I'm curious about for you, Robert, is did that kind of message and that kind of advice from a mentor, how do you create your own space for tinkering? Because we both know that tinkering can sometimes lead to that thing that someone will pay you the money for.
The way that I currently articulate the tinkering is create an offer and get a client to pay you to do something, with the understanding that they are kind of your guinea pig. And so what, like I said, what the offer I currently have, it's called DFY Podcast, where someone pays me a flat rate and I manage their podcast. And that was a service that I paid for a while. Like I would pay a guy sometimes $225, sometimes $315. I'd pay him different amounts. And I just got frustrated with, it felt like the more I was paying him, the lazier he got. So then I built a team of overseas workers and like systematized and trained them in the software. But then I was like, well, now what do I charge someone for that? And I loved the Design Pickle is a site where you can pay like $700 a month and they just like churn out the t-shirt designs for you. And I was like, hey, that's a fun experiment. And that happened at the same time when one of my clients was like, hey, I'm tired of like invoicing you for different amounts. And some months I do this. And he's like, can't you just make me a flat rate? And it was like, cool, that's my guinea pig, and see how it works and go into it with the understanding that there might be a month or two of growing pains, frustration. But if that works out, that's a template and I can bring it to others and be like, hey, this is how it's worked out. Here's the case study. Here's the offer. And it serves a need, but it's slightly different and stands out from others. But it came out better than if I just invented something, because we kind of started off saying like, hey, you're the test subject, you're the template, and then we replicate
Right.
it from there. So I guess that's my solution to inventing a new solution or offer, is figure out who's the test subject.
That makes sense. And going back to you're leaving the university's safety net, et cetera, what did you actually do in your first entrepreneurship opportunity? I believe you said consulting, but what kind of consulting? Was it code for hire? Were there very specific things you were doing? Or were you just any work you could find was what you would do?
I think it was, I wouldn't say it necessarily any work I could find, but I was doing a lot of the freelancing at first. So I made that link tracker PHP script, if you want me to give you the
Nice.
nostalgia there. It wasn't plugins, right? We didn't even have a word for app until Steve Jobs and the iPhone, right? It was PHP script when you had to have like a database. Yeah, you had to run like a database installation script first to install it. And so I made like this link tracker. Then that led to, I made like a similar link tracker for someone else. And I was like creating this stuff. And I was like, and then people were asking like how to learn PHP because they wanted to like make changes to my script or make their own script. So then I said, okay, well, here's these projects I've made, and here's maybe like the first iteration, and here's how to make like a quiz plugin, and here's how to make a pop-up plugin. And I would have this cool blend of, I wasn't teaching like the principles the way that he learns coding in school or college. They say like, oh, here's variables, right? Here's function. I'd say,
Right.
here's how to make something that is useful, and here's the steps I took to make it. And then here you can just plug this into your website and use it. And it was like a nice blend of that. So it's like, if you want to just use the scripts on their own, and I said, if you want to put your own name on it and sell it on your own, you can. And that led into like the next need was learning like copywriting and persuasion, which like now that's more like built in mainstream. But back then people were like, well, I have like a splash page on my site, right? I have like a giant logo, right? And there were these principles of like, we were saying, well, if your site is big and ugly, then it might sell more. And if you have a big giant red headline with quotes around it, it might sell more. And there's a thing called a bucket brigade, which means that if you have the top of your web page and attention getting headline, you want them to read the next and read the next, and you have short sentences and you have bullet points and all the things that would make your English teacher cry in her sleep. And it was a cool blend, because I would realize that after a while, like, okay, most of my buyers here are internet marketers, right? I'm making pop-up plugin, link tracker, quiz script, all these things. And it's like, these are people that they want to convert on their web pages. And this was even before like Google Analytics and all those other tools,
Right.
which are like we take for granted, but now it's like really complicated to plug in all these frameworks. And even back then, we're just like, I just want a simple web page, and I want to add certain things on the web page, like a countdown to count
Sure.
down, 10 minutes to view this web page. And so people would use these tools to make more money. And I was like, okay, well, that led to like teaching copywriting. And then when webinars took off, it led to teaching that. And then like membership software. And then I would kind of blend and go back and forth between the coding and the teaching. And so I had this, one of my like guinea pig clients, I still have him. I've had him for 13 years. And he is a doctor who trains other doctors. in this thing called platelet-rich plasma. And his name's Dr. Charles Runnels. He teaches something called the vampire facelift. So doctors pay him money for a license to use his trademark. And I made this directory plugin where if someone paid him money, joined his WordPress membership site, then they could fill in their photo and their mailing address and their website, and it would put it in this directory. And it was all like geolocated. So if someone's in Atlanta, Georgia, it shows like, it does like the big circle algorithm and shows everyone within all the providers within like 10 miles. And so it was kind of like this teaching and then coding and then using the clients as the guinea pigs to innovate new stuff. So it's a wild adventure and a lot of fun.
And so how long now have you been your own boss?
I went full time 16 and a half years ago. So good chunk of my life.
In my 16 and a half years, just to give this some context, I have, let's see, I started and sold a startup, spent time at CBS Interactive, a little bit of time at Etsy, a little bit of time at Warner Media, and started this current startup with a little consulting work along the way. In general, I like the 4 or 5 years in a, heads down on a thing before you go do the next thing. Over the past 16 years, have you had any moments where you're like, I wish I just had a job?
Every now and then. Sometimes it is stressful, but I like to feed the ego in a healthy way and use it to overcome the anxiety. So probably in the past, maybe 7 years ago or so, I was like, well, I need to get more attention on what I do. And I really liked when my email list was building consistently, but then like the email deliverability kind of lessened, and I was like, need to figure out some other way. So I feel like I kept getting passed over trying to speak on stage, and I would get passed over from people that like had connections and weren't necessarily good stage presenters. And so about 7 years ago was a sweet spot when I was like, okay, I need to have like a public persona, and I need to have somewhat of a speaking presence and have something interesting to say, because some of these people, like they have their little nepotism or they're in here, but that's not something that they can sustain once their connections dry up. And that led to embracing the public speaking and doing the podcasting. And that's why I have nowadays, especially post pandemic, it's like jumping from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting and like using it to, depending on like where people are in the sales cycle. Like I'll be at like, okay, it's time to make this sale, or we're meeting for the first time, but just getting on Zoom and doing the podcasting like you and I are doing now, it's become such a way to consistently build the relationships and get that circle of friends. And at the same time, you generate all this content, right? And nowadays with content, we're still worried about AI and will it all just be dead internet theory and 85% of the internet bots talking to bots? But you have the humanity, you have the person-to-person conversation, and we both get the nostalgia hit hard talking about shareware, and you express your own personality, and like you figure out like who you really are, right? What's underneath and what's authentic. And that's where my jam has been recently. And it just kind of led from, well, was doing the software and the teaching, but then it got back to getting traffic, getting attention, getting money. And I just kept getting blocked with the stage speaking. But then, man, now that there's podcasting and it's more peer-to-peer and you can just build relationships wherever, as long as you're curious and disciplined about it, and that way you're consistent, then you can make podcasting work. Even if you're someone like me who has, maybe I used to have low self-esteem or the shyness or not very good public speaking, you can conquer all that through repetition, building the muscle.
I think that's very well said. I was actually talking with some fellow founders today in an entrepreneur group I'm in, talking about how much it's important to just push yourself into being the face of something, right? And putting yourself out there. And that doesn't, I think you're right. It can be keynotes at conferences. It can be podcasts. It can be having your own TikTok presence. It could be the lighter side of you or the very serious side of you, the emotional side, the funny side, the work side, any and all of the above. But you're so right that like you need something out there. You need something that people can find kind of interesting and jump on that bandwagon per se.
Express yourself in some way. Like there were so many just cool little mentors I had coming up that they don't even know I existed because I just fangirled on their websites. There was a guy named Aaron Broodman, Young Pup, and he, in like 2003, he was like, hey, here's how you make a box, and here's how you make like a draggable box in JavaScript, and we didn't even have that yet. There was a guy named Yuri Fuchs in 1997 who had a site called CGI for Me, and if you wanted to have a guest book or a counter on your website, you'd get this free account and put this code on your site, and they're just all these guys that they tinkered and they expressed themselves, and they're like heroes to a lot of us, and they don't even know it just because they let their freak flag fly, as they say, right? They created some cool stuff and expressed it, and if you leave your music inside of you and you don't express it, then you don't really know who you are, and it doesn't happen instantly. So you have to always be doing it and always be creating the content in whichever way makes sense. That way you can get it fleshed out and you can figure out who you really are as a person and the best way to serve people.
That's a really great way to think about that. So I want to come back to something you opened on, and you went through it quickly, but I think it's important because it's a word that I know and is a topical area I like a lot as well, which is Ikigai.
Yes.
You used it, you dropped it. So I'm going to ask you to define it for anyone on the call who hasn't heard of it, because I also am a big believer in this principle.
It is the intersection. Ikigai is the intersection of what you are good at, what you enjoy, what people need, and what they'll pay money for. I hope I'm saying that right. And the idea is that
you got it.
Ooh, lucky me. Sometimes we pursue just the money, right? Mommy or daddy says, be a doctor, be in law school, we'll pay your way through. And then next thing you know, you're living someone else's life. You don't want that. You say, my dream is to be a stand-up comedian. My dream is to knit sweaters. Great, but you got to pay the bills somehow. And so by looking at this overlap of all these things, it's like we live in the most amazing time, right? If you look back at the year 1500 AD, the wealthiest king would still be living in a stone castle, right? The wealthiest king didn't have ChatGPT, Netflix, word processor, smartphone, TikTok, any of that. Even like the poorest person has a refrigerator, right? Or has access to Google and YouTube. So you have all these amazing resources at your disposal. You can live almost anywhere that you want. You can learn anything that you put your mind to. And so you owe it to yourself to say, well, okay, well, there's some things that you're like pretty good at. Like I'm pretty good at writing, but I'm so glad I didn't become an English major, and because imagine where my career would be. But then, so if you can find something that overlaps and checks all those boxes where you really enjoy it and you can make money from it and you're good at it and people want it, then that is what you should try to figure out. And it might take doing some of those awkward things, right? Might take different jobs, careers, might have to work for Warner Brothers, and instead of holding yourself back, self-sabotaging, wonder what it might be like to work for one of those companies, try it out and see, okay, well, I had different expectations versus what the reality was. So you owe it to yourself to live these multiple lives to then figure out like, okay, what's my jam and what do I want to really be when I grow up? What's sustainable and what can I then be known for? So Ikigai, just those 4 quadrants, where does it overlap? That's what you should do. Don't be too much pursuing the money or too much pursuing the passion. Find something that does all of it.
Love it. And I've thought about this topic area for a while because, from one blush, one of the topics is like, what does the world need? Right. And so a lot of people will like sort of look at this like, well, I want to volunteer and I want to do good things. And it's not to say not to do that. It's to say you must get rewarded for doing that in some physical, basic manner. Now, if you have been brought up by billionaires and you don't need income, well, that box is checked, right? Because what you're going to do is get the other kind of value from it. Whereas if you're someone like me, came up, from sort of nothing in a way, well, I have to be careful about when I get to spend that time, because otherwise I can't send my kids to college or whatever the next transfer is. So it's never to say, I don't want anyone to come off this thinking like that you're totally right, by the way. It's never all about the money. Point is, it's never all about any one thing. It's about that blended life in so many ways. I really love hearing how you weave philosophies into sort of your life and your workflow. When did you start DFY Podcast, by the way?
I started that in 2021.
Got it. And is that now your full-time startup? Is that one of many projects? What is that in your current professional world?
It is what I'm growing, what I'm putting the most focus on. I do have a couple of those clients, like that P2P doctor and a real estate investor, but the podcasting is what I want to be known for, and it's what my primary focus is.
Got it. And is it Ikigaiing for you already?
Yes, because we mentioned a few minutes ago that there's so much AI possibilities with it, right? Like I use a lot of like LinkedIn prospecting and meet people that way, but I really geek out with the iteration of LLMs and ChatGPT especially. And what I mean by that is, say you have 200 podcast episodes. A lot of people, well, first of all, a lot of people with 200 podcast episodes don't even have them on YouTube. And it's like, okay, there's a whole other traffic source. But you take those 200 podcast episodes, you transcribe them all, and then you can upload them to your ChatGPT, like 10 files at a time, and build a lot of interesting stuff with it, right? You have 200 episodes, 200 guests. You could literally have ChatGPT like read the transcript and create a personal follow-up message with each guest. And I do this every quarter. I'm doing it this week right now. So every of your 200 podcast guests, you can say, okay, well, figure out what would be a graphic, figure out what like a promotional email or a LinkedIn post would be, and put all that stuff in a Google folder and create a custom message to that podcast guest and like reference specific funny moments in the episode. And you can build a spreadsheet 10 episodes at a time and say, here's all my 200 episodes. Here's what I've named them. Here's maybe a better SEO optimized version. Here's the keywords that I'm targeting. Here's like the ideal person and problem they would have listening to this podcast episode. So like we said, the fun is back on the internet, right? The tinkering is back. And especially with podcasting, where you're creating this body of work, it's hundreds of hours of videos, hundreds of thousands of words of content, and you can have a lot of fun with like just generatively iterating through and saying like, let me make a diagram for each of my podcast episodes, find a interesting quote from each of my shows, find the best resources, the best books they provided. That's like what it seems like AI was meant to do, right? Do the dirty work and sift through the signal from the noise. So you're making all these podcast episodes. And so you can even tell how I geek out about someone's show, because there's all these ways to use the AI to come up with a result. And we've all been amazed these last couple of years. Like, really, how did ChatGPT come up with that answer? And so it's a lot of fun to feed it your episodes and like build out all these extra assets or draw out different connections. And it's just like the programming plus the writing and the philosophy and the marketing strategy all in one. It's so much podcasting plus AI. It's so much fun. It's amazing.
So with everything you just described, how much of that is what is actually happening inside DFY Podcast right now?
All of it to some extent.
All of that's happening.
Yeah. And also around 2021, well, my son was born in 2020, and 2021, I was like, I can't be a stay-at-home dad plus run this whole business. I had my son on my shoulder and holding the baby bottle. We've all been there, right? You're in it for an hour and a half, 5 times a day, just holding the dang baby bottle. And we bought one of those. There was like this like plastic thing where like it clipped to something, and it was like a really stiff kind of pole, and hoping that he could like drink from it like a gerbil. Didn't work out. You have to hold the baby. There's no way around it. And I was like, well, I still need to make money. And I couldn't be like typing and coding on the keyboard, but I also didn't want to fall into, like we mentioned before, that kind of stuck in management hell. So I figured out how to build a team of workers, and especially overseas workers from the Philippines, because they're eager and they don't have the ego like a lot of Americans do, and they can be trained, and especially at like the general administrative tasks, and especially when you figure out people and you're patient and you figure out your SOPs, your standing operating procedures, your checklists, and you're a little bit organized, like you have the task management and the Asana. And when I first started it, it was before we had all these AI tools, and they would literally listen to someone's podcast. And I would get a podcast client. They'd say, like, here's just 20 minutes of audio. And they would, I think they'd run it through like a rough transcriber, but transcription sucked even a few years ago. And then the workers would like clean up the transcript, and they would spend like an hour thinking of a title for a podcast episode. And now those same workers use the AI tools, and they just feed it into something, and they get 5 possible podcast titles. So the AI has really accelerated what we do, but the fun, the secret sauce is also in training people, because AI can't do everything, right? It can do so many amazing things, but it makes mistakes, or sometimes it just creates a lot of garbage. So you still need the human factor, but you can kind of code that in a way as well, because you hire and train your employees and check on their work, or have other people check on their work. And then it becomes almost like a outsourcing inception, where now when I have a new, like say, because right now I think I have 9 people on the team, and then I had one person quit a few months ago, and then we hired 3 to replace them. And then I was like, I told my team leader, like, hey, like, you hire the person, like, you interview the person, you train the person. And so it's kind of fun to be the chess master, and there's the things that I want to happen. And sure, sometimes I go in and see how it's done, but like a lot of it's kind of running on its own. And I'm more of the salesman, but I'm like, hey, if this picks up more, like maybe I'll hire and train a salesperson to do that. And then I do all this podcast interviewing, and I guess they say you get it to the point where your company runs itself, and then you full-time find a buyer for the company, or you full-time work on just the growth or the press. And it's like, hey, that's new opportunities that we never would have thought of otherwise.
Robert, you're almost giving people a blueprint. People, if you want to start a business, just do it the way Robert just described it. Like it was like, that's succinct. We're obviously talking about podcasting and AI, but it's sort of the same thing, right? Come up with a problem, or solve a problem, whether it's all through tech, all through humans, some hybrid in between, get good people doing good things, ... So that was really, really salient of you. And thank you for that. You've had this really interesting journey. I have a couple more questions though. First one is, you describe yourself as I would, the word geek comes up, and you were practically coding at 3. It sounds to me like the past few years, you're spending less and less time coding anything, and you're training people, you're doing public speaking. You sound like a whole different person in so many ways. Would you still call yourself a geek?
I still would, but I do think that I'm growing up, and I'm understanding that the social skills are important, because you think back to our generation, right? Or our respective generations. When we were kids, you think of, well, a geek is like Bill Gates, right? You had to be one or the other. You were a jock or you were a geek. But then now there are all these, like, it's kind of blended, right? And there's all these expectations, right? And especially to be sexist, if you're a man, right? If you're a man, your value is if you can make money and if you can be a leader. And it's also just important to have social skills. And I think that part might be to counterbalance the social media and the kind of pandemic privacy that's happened. Everyone's so shut in, right? Everyone's just like looking on their phones. And I even had a little bit of like, when you go into a social situation and the next day you're like, oh, I should have done this or this better. We had like back to school night with my son, and back to school night, hardly anyone shows up. And it was like the other years were like, there was like 2 other parents with a kid, and they came in and they were on the other side of the classroom. And then I was playing with my kid, and I wanted to go and talk to one of the other parents. By the time they were gone, I was like, I should have just gone up and embraced the awkwardness and just gone and talked to one of those other parents and said, hey, my name is Robert. What's your name? What's your kid's name? and here's my kid's name. And so I'm definitely making sure that I push my own boundaries of the social skills, and especially like we keep going back to having Zoom meetings. And I think you're like my fifth Zoom meeting today, and it took a while to get the momentum because it's easy to say, "Oh, another Zoom meeting. I'm so exhausted with this." But like, what's the alternative? Just to sit at home and not have much social interaction? And us entrepreneurs, internet marketers, like, sure, you could go to a meetup or a mastermind, but in general, you don't have like a neighbor down the street who does what you do, right? There's not really a lot of
Right.
people that really get what you do on a daily basis. And we used to like call people, but for some reason now it's just texting or messaging or posting. And you need to keep that human connection alive, the one-on-one video, even though it is awkward. And for some of us introverts, it sure does suck, but it's important to strengthen the muscle so that way you're like, oh, I only talked to 5 people today. I got to get those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. And so I'm pushing myself to like make sure that I'm a people person, especially because my 5-year-old son, he's autistic. He's not good at social skills. He doesn't talk a lot. So I think I'm having the aha at this in real time at this very moment. Like when I was younger, I was kind of shy. I only had a handful of friends, and I maybe because of my limited friend choices, I kind of chose bad friends who kind of maybe like bullied me sometimes. And I don't want that for my son. And I want to show a good example of someone who can rise up and can make friends and can talk to people, even though it's awkward for all of us. That way, him with the deck stacked against him socially with the autism and the different skills to say, oh, well, dad can be a friendly people person, talk to thousands of people on a podcast. I can too. Being a good social extrovert type role model is a motivating factor for me, and I'm just now realizing.
Wow. Thank you for diving into your personal life the way you just did. That's very generous of you to share that.
I wish I'd tried because I would have delivered on your promise.
We almost made it there. What I'd love to end our discussion today, Robert, is with everything you've accomplished, with your principled way of living, with the transformative nature of how you do the work, how do you define success in life today?
I think defining success is doing what you want during the day, being able to clear your schedule. And a lot of people don't have that, right? You have to show up at this place and have this boss. And I have put a lot of value on being able to clear the schedule if I want to. And you can't do that every day, right? You won't have a business, but that was always tempting for me. When I looked at my mom would have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she reminded me every single day she had to drive from Tracy to San Jose, 2 hours each way. Oof. down 580. And then
I know that drive. I know exactly what that drive is. Oh my!
Through like Altamont Pass and through Livermore and Fremont and all that mess. And she told me how stressful it was, and I was like thinking like, I'm stressed hearing it from you. And I had to hear about that for 25 years. And then now 25 years after that, she still tells me how stressful it was then. So I'm like, I'm getting it 3 different ways because I heard it at the time and I heard it afterwards. And I was like, it's good to sacrifice for your family, but there had to have been a better way, right? Like now we have remote work at least, but like it sounded like so stressful, right? To have to get up at this time, be here when they say. You might as well be enlisted in the military, but even that's not forever. So I like the ability to set my own schedule, but that great power comes with great responsibility, as Spider-Man says, right? And that you set your meetings, you set your schedule, but then you do have to show up at it, but at least that's what you chose to do. And a lifelong dream of mine has been to pay off my house. And I'm getting there. I'm close. I'm not paying it off as fast as I want, but I'm in like that final home stretch. And I really look forward to that because I'll feel like I've accomplished something and I have a little bit more choices and freedom of like not having that monthly obligation, because it's a scary place to be, right? Where you say, I'm doing what I have to, and I have to work this 9 to 5, which is great as long as you're happy, or if you're not happy, you have a plan for eventually getting out. Because there's always like a season, right, where you have to do the really hard work and you reap the rewards. And so, yeah, to answer your question, the ability to have schedule freedom, that's what I want. And that's what I have, is to be able to clear the schedule if I have to, but we can't do that every single day, but at least there's that.
Amazing. Robert, thank you for joining me on my podcast today. Where do you want people to go find you on the internet?
To get a sample of me, it's marketeroftheday.com is the podcast. We have over 1,400 episodes, and you, Mr. Jeremy Toeman, are a guest as well. We'll be recording it right after this, but what I really, really want you to go to is DFYpodcast.com. We've been talking about how important it is to express yourself, and you, Jeremy, talked about like the TikTok reels. And if you are just trying to record like the same 60 seconds or come up with the best reel, well, hey, instead of generating those viral moments, why not pick through the content that you've already had? And I think that a podcast, at least in my opinion, is a great jumping off point for your content. You have a show, you have Mr. Jeremy Toeman and amazing guests such as him, and you have these authentic conversations, you have these unexpected moments, and then you pick off the reels off of that. And whenever you go on LinkedIn and you see these people with like these amazing graphics with like a quote that they said, and how did they come up with that quote? Well, maybe they just had their own show, or they appeared on other shows and they talked enough where something profound happened and they said, ooh, I'll pluck that out. And I think that it's a great way to create your content, to build the personal relationships and connections, and just beef up your skills, figure out the messaging marketing of your SaaS or of your software product. So you should have a podcast if it's something that you've wanted to do, and me and my team do the back end grunt work for you. It's DFYpodcast.com.
Robert, maybe we'll get DFY podcast using Augie, and we'll get you guys doing the Founder 50 podcast for me, and we'll have all sorts of fun journeys together. Thanks so much for giving me some of your time today, and have a great rest of your day.
You as well.